Hello everybody, welcome to another episode from the DJ Anesh series, giving you the best in Southeast Asian history. Today is a very special episode. Once again, we are looking at skills. We are looking at the other topic that is going to come up for your CPs, national unity. I hope that you guys have been doing well, and I hope that your papers have been going well, and I know that you guys are going to rise to the challenge as good Arians will by tackling a really difficult paper for history next Monday. I've heard you guys, we've done the surveys, and you guys have said that yes, we want a difficult paper. We want to be challenged. We want the most craziest paper that you can think of, and I've heard you guys loud, and as what the people want, I have to deliver to them. Wow. Sounds like a political speech fitting of the elections. I've heard your voice, you stand counted, and here I am to deliver what you've asked for. So, are we ready? Yes, we are ready! Wow. Rousing applause, such spirit, worthy of the fine young men and women that you are. Okay, come, enough talk. Today we're going to go through another essay on national unity. The last time round during tutorial classes, we went through an essay question on political stability, and so this will be the counterpart series in the sense that now we are looking at the same kind of thing but with national unity. Today I'm going to go through an essay question, and I'm also going to be introducing to you argument frameworks and the way you can approach these kind of questions. The last time round, if you remember, just a short recap, we looked at two-factor comparison kind of questions, especially when the question identifies two given factors, and my suggestion and my proposal to you guys was to keep the comparison as consistent as possible throughout the essay. So that was that argument frame which you can use with that. Today we are looking at a different question type, and with this question type perhaps I can suggest to you other argument frames as well. Keep in mind that the argument frames that I expose you to right now, they are not fixed, and of course matters of style is up to you, how you want to arrange your points, what kind of arguments you want to make, what kind of frameworks you have. Just giving you some structures and some ways to conceptualize your arguments so that it may give you direction as to how to approach a Southeast Asian essay. Okay, so without further ado, going into it, I'll be using this essay question for today's podcast, and just going to dissect this essay question, and through this essay question introduce to you some frameworks that you can possibly have in order to deal with questions like this. So repeat after me once again. This, hey, say out loud. Make sure your family members hear you. This is in no way a hint as to what's coming out for the common test. You got to say or not? You got to put your hand to your heart. Okay, good. Now, seeing that we have said the pledge of allegiance, we'll now go into this essay question. As you can see, this essay question that I've chosen, I chose it because it is a really standard essay question. There's nothing too sophisticated about it in terms of the terminology or jargon or the kind of presentation. It's the most basic form of national unity questions that you can see. And the question here is this: how effective were governments in asserting national unity in independent Southeast Asia? So, with this essay question, quite clearly some terms might already pop out to you, and these are the things that we are going to be dealing with today. Definitely, we are going to be needing to unpack effectiveness, or in this case, effective, and we are also, I guess we also need to unpack the idea of national unity. The word here, asserting, is taken from your syllabus document itself, so I'm using their phrasing. But this doesn't, in the past I've been asked this question, does this mean when you use the word asserting, is on a more forceful measure of things? I think my suggestion is that you don't need to read too much into that. Asserting, establishing, I think it just means like, how effective were they in delivering national unity? What kind of impact, what kind of results did they have? So these are some of the initial initial responses that we have when we are looking at this question. Okay. Now, same thing as we try to deal with this question, we need to connect it to the syllabus and where in the syllabus is this located at. So, looking at theme 1, we are still over there, search for political stability, but you notice that even under this heading of political stability, we would still have national unity considerations or national unity assessments or looking at the social dimension of political stability. So this is what I mean by there's a lot of interchangeability and there's a lot of interaction between politics, social, and economics. So I encourage you to make as many of these connections as you can because they are really interacting with one another. Even in your syllabus document, you can see that under the broad theme of search for political stability, in this case, the content is approaches to national unity. So we may be looking and assessing national unity in itself, but we may also be looking and assessing national unity in relation to larger questions and larger assessments on political stability or domestic stability. Learning outcomes here evaluate the extent to which Southeast Asian governments were able to achieve national unity over time. So this is also from the syllabus document, and you can see that it quite nicely ties to the question that I've given you today. Quite clearly over here, the main focus is on governments and assessing the kind of effectiveness they had with regards to national unity. So on that note, going down to question focus and type, definitely I think by now we should all know that this question primarily focuses on you needing to assess and to measure the level of effectiveness in Southeast Asian governments, not just across the different countries, but across time as well. Remember, the golden rule in Southeast Asia is to always look across countries and across time. Across countries, because why? This is a regional study, we need to be representative of the region. And across time, why? Because what the situation was like in the beginning might not be the same as the one towards the end. So I want you to account for different contexts. I want you to account for different evolutions and things like that as well. So on the note of case studies, why you should look across case studies is because number one, this is a Southeast Asian paper. We are looking at a regional study. We are looking at regional trends. And I do encourage you guys to include more than 3 case studies by the end of your essay so that you get a good representation of what was it really like in Southeast Asia. So again, the minimum number of case studies is 3. I will state that specifically in the instructions. But of course, as good RVians rising to the challenge, demanding a difficult paper, wanting to go all crazy during the common test, you guys should aim for 5, 6, maybe 7 case studies. On this note, I don't want to put too much pressure on you guys as well. If you can, okay, you got to balance it out. Okay, between the number of case studies you want to present, which is your evidence, against the kind of explanations and analysis you can make of the evidence, to be honest, I'd rather spend more time on the explanations and the analysis. So don't go crazy onto your examples and your evidence. Make sure that it doesn't become long descriptions or long narrations, things like that. Make sure that you always focus on your analysis, focus on your explanations. These are the portions that will help you to explain your point or will help you to connect to the question or to help you to draw some trends, to draw some understanding of the case studies, the evidence that you're presenting. So between these kind of goals in a paragraph and in an essay, I would rather focus on explanations and analysis. So if you give me, let's say, 4 case studies, but damn solid evidence, damn solid explanations and analysis, I would like that better than you giving me 7 case studies with full of narration and description and not much explanation or analysis. Okay, so try to balance that out. Again, this is your first big test in JC, so just try it out and give your best, and then we'll work on it from there on out. Now, with regards to the question focus and the question type, that mainly revolves around that. And to this question type, I would want to go through with you guys and propose to you two different types of argument frameworks that you might want to consider in meeting this kind of questions that require you to do overall assessments or overall effectiveness measurements, that kind of stuff. So the two argument frameworks that I have for you today, oh, sorry, a bit morning sinus. You get some ASMR of my nose. You like it? Cool. Now, going into the two frameworks that we have, the first one is called the dominant exception framework, and the other one is the determinant-based framework. Now, these are all my terms, and it's just the way I conceptualize things. You type this into Google, you probably won't find it anywhere. So it's like OG me, like, whoa, limited edition, that kind of stuff. Look at me trying to get hip with the young crowd, hypebeast hashtag, that kind of stuff. So given that these are my terms, and given that you probably wouldn't find these kind of things elsewhere, I think it's good for me to explain a bit what I mean by these frameworks and how you can use them to answer these type of questions. Okay? At the end of the day, no matter what framework you choose, the last point over there, you must have a main argument and you must have argumentative balance. Okay? The idea here is to have a voice, right? Have your opinion, show what's the main argument and the side that you're leaning towards to, but do give due consideration to other perspectives, to exceptional case studies, and so on and so forth out there, because you want to acknowledge that it isn't 100% like that. There's some sort of a variety, but those exceptions or those alternative interpretations will never overwhelm your main argument. They will never contradict your main argument. Later on, we'll explore more about how that kind of thing works out. Okay. Now, one of the biggest things that kids have struggle with and need help with is criteria setting. So when it comes to this question, I would want to unpack this with you a bit to show you that actually it's not that daunting, and it is very manageable, especially once you understand how it's done. Honestly, you can continue to use this approach with other essays of this topic as well. Okay, so the first one, okay, so going into criteria setting, the last time round we did talk about it in the PS tutorial, and these are argument tools or terms used to assess the relative, in this case, is the relative impacts of governments in their management of national unity. So remember that for this essay in particular, we're really focusing on the impact of government approaches and government policies and the kind of outcomes that arise from their approaches and policies, so that we can get an overall assessment of their effectiveness or their success. So in this question, a large part of the criteria would have to be tied to the specific components of national unity. A lot of what the measurement of success or the measurement of effectiveness would be is in whether they achieve the overarching goals of national unity or not. So these, if you are specializing in national unity, or even if you're not, it doesn't really matter, do memorize this as best as you can. Of course, you can add on to this list of national unity indicators, but any national unity essay would probably require you to surface these indicators, these components of national unity, because I need to know what I'm assessing. I need to know the indicators that I'm assessing, whether they hit them or not. I have to specify specifically, explicitly, like all these things, not just in my intro, but throughout my essay. As I make my arguments and my points, a lot of them are going to be tied to whether or not they hit or they don't hit any of these or all of these 4 points. So going into the components of national unity, we have the physical and political aspect of it, territorial integrity, whether the nation in itself remains intact. Is there a breakup of the nation? Is there a huge potential for the breakup of the nation? So that's territorial integrity. Looking at the stability and cohesion across majority and minority relations. So looking at the dynamics in the demographics of the nation, assessing whether it's stable, or whether there's a lot of unhappiness, resentment, discrimination, and so on and so forth. What's the state of the interaction between the majority and minority groups? What are their attitudes towards each other? What are their mentalities towards one another? The third one, absence of large-scale and protracted ethnic conflict and strife. Of course, many of you all know this, and this is one of the most visible indicators of national unity or national disunity. And I just want you guys to understand that even though we have a broad categorization like this, ethnic conflict, this term itself betrays the idea because in reality, there are many different types of ethnic conflict. There can be insurgencies, there can be separatist movements, there can be mass protests and rebellions and demonstrations. But so in this case, what I want you to do is really to unpack the term conflict. There can be different ways for you to see it, and it can also help you to organize your case studies or even to help you to make an overall assessment of the level of effectiveness that governments had, weighing them against each other, the different governments across Southeast Asia. And the last one, inclusive and encompassing national identity. So national identity, again, I should stress that national identity can have many different conceptualizations in the sense that even in assimilationist countries, we can have a cohesive and a stable national identity, especially if the minorities subscribe into it, the majorities have a stable relationship with the minorities and all that kind of stuff. So national identity is not only exclusive to countries that pursue integration. You can find national identity, a stable structure and a stable manner of it in integration, in assimilation countries as well. Okay, so broadly speaking, these are the 4 big indicators of national unity, and definitely in any essay consideration, I think no matter what the question is for national unity, you would have to consider these 4 things, and you would have to integrate these 4 things as part of your criteria and your analysis and your explanations. These are the key pillars of your argument, because whether or not you prove effectiveness or ineffectiveness, a lot of it is going to be hinged on whether or not they meet these criteria. However, I would like to introduce to you that a further layer of criteria that we should consider, integrating them into our explanations, integrating them into our analysis as well, putting them into our arguments to take it to a higher level. So we have those 4 indicators of national unity. And we can make an argument that countries, and in your case studies, they did manage to hit these kind of things. But for me, perhaps that may be a sound argument, but maybe it's not a complete one, or it's not a comprehensive one. So there are other criteria that I need you to consider as well, and you will find them at the second bullet point onwards. So the first one, it's not just about achieving these components ad hoc or at a certain point in time, but we want to firstly check the extent of impact across key components of NU. So there are 4 components there, right? I think the most successful governments will be able to achieve all 4 of them. So that's my check across the components of NU. There are some governments that may achieve 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, or 2 out of 4 of them, and that kind of stuff. Is it enough to say effectiveness? Perhaps so, actually, especially if the things that they don't achieve, they can still be seen to be showing some progression over there. It might not be a perfect situation, but it's not that devastating until it compromises on the national unity overall assessment. So I want to look at all these 4 things, and again, on a spectrum, the most successful governments would achieve all 4 of them, and the least successful ones would achieve none of them. The second thing is the time factor, sustainability, durability of outcomes and achievements. I don't just want to say that governments were able to achieve it at this point in time. I want to say that they achieved it across time. And then conversely, for governments that achieved it at a certain point in time, but then beyond that point in time, it starts to collapse, then I would say that, hey, look, wait, this isn't a robust national unity strategy, and while it may have achieved it in the short term, across time because of whatever issues, it started to break down. So that is the idea of time coming into your essay as a form of criteria as well. The third one is about superficiality and authenticity. This one might be related a bit to the time factor that was just discussed, because some strategies are done without commitment, or some strategies don't address the core issues that are facing the minorities or the majorities. So that would definitely produce a very unsustainable situation compared to policies that really deal and engage with the issues at hand and really tackle them for the problems that they have and try to work very comprehensive and robust solutions moving forward. So as long as you can see some level of progression in terms of positive outcomes, I think that's something that we can credit to the government as being consistent as well as being very targeted. The fourth one over here, the contextual difficulty and what can realistically be achieved. This one you may want to save it for some later part of your essay where maybe for instance you talk about a case study where you evidence that governments may not have been seen to be very effective in those case studies because of whatever reason. But if you want to evaluate this case study and you want to say that, oh, actually, I understand that the governments here are seen as ineffective. However, there is a contextual situation behind this as to why they are ineffective. It may not be down solely just to their mismanagement. It might actually be down to other contextual issues that you should bring in order to mitigate some of their fault or some of their responsibility. The fifth one over here, assessment of the regional dominant trend. Again, with Southeast Asia, I do want you to do assessments on what seems to be the dominant trend in the region. So that will give you a better gauge to your argument and more credence for your argument as well. Now, I think of course, the focus here, as I mentioned just now, is on government policies and the assessment of how governments managed the national unity situation. But at the same time, I also want to propose to you some other points or some other considerations that you can have in order to provide a bit more perspective, give a bit more dimension to your essay. Because even though this essay is focused on government policy and the assessment of their policies, how successful their policies are, how feasible they are, or how well they are implemented, or the kind of response that they get, would involve other actors in the national unity landscape as well. So this is a challenge to you guys, which is in your essay, dominantly you would be talking about the effectiveness with government policy. However, is it possible to also integrate other actors in your assessment of government policy? So the focus is still on government policy and your assessment of that, but taking into account the minorities, their attitudes, the majority, their attitudes, as well as other contextual information with regards to the domestic situation. Would you be able to integrate these kind of things within your analysis as well? So there's no hard and fast rule as to how you can use these other actors and what role do they play in your argument. But that's where your voice comes in, that's where your style comes in, to see if it's possible for you to think about these things and if they have a place in your argument. I'm not saying that these kind of things are compulsory, or not saying that if you don't include these things or you'll not score well. It's more of like this is another dimension which you can consider, and it will be a good encapsulation of what the national unity landscape looks like. It's not all just simply about the policy itself, but it's the policy in interaction with various actors in the national unity landscape. Okay? Now, with regards to the two frameworks that I have for you today, the first one is called the dominant exception framework. Now, don't be too thrown off by the terminology here. Honestly, it's something you already know. This framework, I think, is most familiar to you guys, where you will have a main argument, it's an overall assessment, and you have a balance, like sometimes some of you all call it a counter argument, and then finally you have the evaluation of the balance or the evaluation of the counter argument. So the example that I've given you here follows this framework of the dominant exception idea of argumentation. So the overall stand that I have here is that most governments largely effective, so that's my main argument. That seems to be my dominant trend across Southeast Asia, and then I explain why a bit. Then my balance comes in. I say a reservation to the argument could be made through looking at exceptional case studies, right? So I'm showing that there are certain differentiation or certain nuances across Southeast Asia with regards to this idea of effectiveness of national unity. So over there, I do provide some alternative perspective and some exceptional case studies as well. So that fulfills the idea of argument balance. The last part you see over there, it fulfills the idea of the evaluation of balance. You must be very careful not to leave your balance or your counter arguments hanging, right? They must be evaluated some way back to the main argument, or they must be explained in such a way that it doesn't contradict your main argument. Okay, the basic idea here is that try to not leave these kind of things hanging. So over here, I would explain the exceptionalism of how governments mismanage the situation there. So maybe the government's conceptualization of their policies there was really so crappy, and the way they did it was really, really counterproductive, far beyond any other government that was out there. That kind of really unique, extraordinary circumstances that are happening within and only within that country. I will explain that quite a bit. And plus, I would have the link back where I'll draw comparisons with the dominant trend of management in Southeast Asia. So I have to link it back to my main argument. I have to draw it back there. Because at the end of the day, I want to conclude my essay by establishing firmly my main argument. So again, as you see right now, you can see that actually it's not really something it's not new lah. Basically, you kind of, I think, have been dealing with this kind of essay structure for quite a bit of your journey already, especially if you've been a history student since Sec 1. Now, the other argument that I want to run by you guys is called the determinant-based framework. Now, this one respects the idea of Southeast Asia in that there may not be a clear dominant trend. And in fact, in terms of the case studies, there might be a more equal grouping or more equal categorization of the case studies. So what that means, right, is that instead of a 6 versus 1 situation, you might have a 3 versus 4 situation. Now, let's say if you have a 3 in terms of case studies, let's say, if you have 3 versus 4, right, then it's you can't really say that there is a dominant trend out there, correct? So instead, what you can do is set determinants as to what accounts for these categories. Now, this argumentation method is a bit more difficult and it's a bit more sophisticated because you need to find what are the determinants that are separating the case studies, Group A, there are 3 case studies, Group B, there are 4 case studies, that kind. So over here, I have suggested for you just 2, but obviously there can be a lot more determinants. Number 1, policy approaches, and number 2, attitudes of the minorities. Now, in this case, I'm making the statement or the assessment that, for governments that tended to pursue this type of policy, they tended to have this type of results. For countries that had this type of minorities, tended to have this type of results. So you can see that the determinants are really going to be the key drivers of this argument, where they separate the case studies and all that. At the end of the day, do you need to come back to an overall stand? You can. If you leave it as it is, it's also possible. You just need to explain and restate the determinants that you used in order to provide this very nuanced argument for Southeast Asia. So in a sense, you wouldn't have to a large extent or to a small extent kind of argument, but you will be having a more nuanced approach, 3v4, that kind of stuff. So you can, it's a variation lah. You can that could be your one of the terms that you use to characterize the situation that you see in Southeast Asia. There are many other determinants out there, so I encourage you to try it out. So with this very short podcast, I hope that I've shown you some ideas about how you can conceptualize your essays. For national unity, I will give you 2 sample essays as well. These are from your seniors before, and one of them is on integration, one of them is on assimilation. So I thought it's fair to give you both policy approaches, both sides to the story, and so you can get an understanding of the policy approaches a bit better. Again, it is in no way a hint as to what is coming out. I just thought in fairness, and I'm just thinking in terms of what's the broadest thing that I can cover with you guys for national unity to prep you all for the CPs. Okay, so with that, I think we are good, and I wish you all the best. Anything, message me, just let me know. I'll help you out with that. Okay, cool. Thanks. DJ Anesh out.